Well, we're delighted to have Reverend Alex Holt with us today. I believe Alex lives in Eugene, is that correct? And but he was born and raised on a farm in Maine, and for the last 30 years has been practicing Buddhism. And so he's going to talk to us this morning about awareness and Buddhism and aha moments. Reverend Alex.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, first thing I need to ask you is, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. If you can't hear me, make a nice gesture, like this or like this. Any other gestures can wait until later. He's the one that has all power, by the way. Thank you for leading the service today, and let me sort myself out here. And is Ken here today?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, I should thank him anyway. And Pam and Bryn, thank you. That's beautiful music. And I ran into Brian Jessup today. I knew him a long, long time ago when he was in seminary, and we were in Berkeley. And so I was going to tell him, well, you haven't changed a bit, you know, maybe a little bit more gray hair and a few more wrinkles, but then I look at myself, that's the same thing. So it was great to see him and to see you all. And I also bring greetings from Margot. Margot Reinhardt was my intern minister in West Seattle at the UU congregation there. And it was I was there 2016 to 2019, and it was an adventurous interim, shall we say, because that was when things in the UUA were really beginning to percolate. And Margot was a wonderful intern, and I talked to her recently. She's been in Bozeman, Montana for the last year, and I think she's extending it. They're going to extend it one more year because they were not able to find a permanent person. And right now, she's spending time in Washington State, and then is going to be flying back and forth to Montana every month. So I'm familiar with that because I've been going to Glacier UU Fellowship in Kalispell this last year. But anyway, she's always spoke very highly of you. And when the opportunity arose that I could be here, I thought, great, now I get to know some of the people who Margot said such nice things about. So hello to you all. So yes, I've been a Buddhist practitioner for about 30 years, almost the same amount of time I've been in ministry. I mostly read about Buddhism, and probably you know that reading about Buddhism is not the same as practicing it. And in 1995, the last millennium, I was going through an existential midlife crisis, which I'm sure many of us do. I was trying to do an extension ministry in the Portland area. It was all failing. I had a marriage that was on the rocks. My ministry was unfocused, and a lot of it was because I had dipped my toes, actually my whole body, back into alcoholism. Alcoholism runs in my family, and for many years, off and on, it was a deep problem in my life. So I was a mess. That's the only way to put it. So I decided to apply for a staff position at a Buddhist retreat center in Southwest Washington State called Cloud Mountain Retreat Center. And I don't know if any of you have ever been there. It's a beautiful, about 4 acres of land, kind of out in the boonies where retreat centers tend to be. And the retreat center hosted Buddhist retreats all year round, almost every weekend or for an entire week. And the staff, of course, supported those retreats as much as we possibly could. One of the most intense ones, and we knew about it because people had been through it before, was a retreat, a Zen retreat, led by a very well-known Japanese Zen teacher by the name of Harada Roshi. And Roshi usually means respected one or teacher. And he was highly respected. highly regarded, and very strict. And Zen teachers, by the way, can be very strict. So when he came to the retreat center and started a Sesshin or Zen retreat, anybody here ever been to a Zen retreat? You have. Do you remember a Kasaku?
No.
Oh, okay, you will. I'm not going to demonstrate it. During the retreat, and when I lived at the monastery, they did this as well. Imagine a wooden sword with it's not sharp or anything. And what the teacher would do when you were sitting in silence, sitting zazen, and when you're doing it 8 or 10 hours a day, the back gets really tense. And everybody falls asleep. And you're not supposed to fall asleep when you're doing zazen in a Zen monastery. So the teacher would walk around the meditation hall, and they'd be holding this sword-like thing, which was just made of wood. And if you wanted to get hit by the sword, you had to bow in a certain way, and they would basically strike you once on this side, you remember now, and once on this side. And when I was at the retreat center and we were hearing whack, 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 I thought, wow, this is pretty masochistic now, isn't it? It must be Zen. But what it was really doing was striking the acupuncture points on the back. And you would definitely wake up a bit. And that was the whole point. They don't do that in this country anymore because Americans do not like being struck by objects. But anyway, he was very good at it. And one of the other rituals during his retreat would be they would have formal Japanese tea with the staff. And so one of his attendants sat down with the staff, and I think there were about 5 of us at that time, and he would go through all the instructions about how to act and bow and so on at a tea ceremony. Anybody been here at a tea ceremony? Were you? Yeah. You should come up and talk. Yeah, why have me do it? Well, anyway, they gave us all the instructions, and Harada Roshi was known, as I said, for being strict, and he wanted things done precisely because that is the way it is done in the Zen tradition. So the day came that we walked up to the teacher's cottage, and we all sat in a circle, and I think probably there were maybe 8 or 10 of us there. And Roshi and his translator, because he didn't speak English, were sitting kind of over this way. And the person who was leading the tea ceremony, which is very elaborate, was sitting beside them. And so each person around the circle needed to bow a gasho like this when the tea would come to their turn. And basically the phrasing would be, would you like to have tea? Heaven help you if you said no. And the tea would eventually come in. This was in a stone bowl, so it was fairly heavy. And it was green tea. And so it got to me, and I bowed, and the tea came to me. Now, we had been told how to drink the tea. So we were all a little nervous at that point. So I lifted the bowl, the heavy stone bowl of tea, to my lips, and I started drinking it slowly. The room was fairly quiet, a little bit of talking going on, but Roshi and his attendant were watching everyone very closely to see how they were doing. So I started sipping my tea, trying to be mindful, and all of a sudden, everything stopped. Everyone went silent. I'm not demonstrating, by the way. And I was in the middle of drinking my tea, and everything went silent. And I thought to myself, because I was pretty depressed at that point in my life, I thought, oh shit, what have I done? Am I dribbling my tea down my front? Have I somehow set back American-Japanese Zen relations by 50 years? So I finished up. I just did the best I could. And Roshi spoke quickly in Japanese to his translator. And she looked at me and she said, Roshi wants me to tell you that you drink tea very well. Roshi wants me to tell you that you drink tea very well. It was just mind-boggling. And I looked up at Harada Roshi, and he just smiled very slightly at me. That moment was an epiphany, which is what I'm talking about today. It was one of those moments when suddenly the world changes. And you don't have much control over it. It just comes up and just whacks you across the head spiritually and says, well, pay attention. And so I remember after the tea ceremony was over, walking back down to the main building, and it was like I was floating on air, because the way he said it and the appreciation that he expressed was something I'd not heard for years in my life. And of course, he was a very well-known Zen teacher, and this was a compliment. And it was, wow, I just couldn't imagine. It was such a powerful experience of transition in my life that I ended up meeting my two Zen teachers there, who were the abbots at what was then called Large Mountain Zen Center in Oregon. And I asked them if I could come to the monastery, and they said yes. And so I was there for about a year. Now, did that moment of awareness, of insight, really change me? No. Although it put me into a direction for my life that I needed to go around spiritual practice and gaining perhaps more wisdom, I still drank in secret. And a lot of the life things that I was going through, I really had to struggle with when I was at the monastery, but that's what monasteries are for. So, as I said, I continued to drink secretly, and eventually I started focusing moment to moment to moment of my life. And if any of you have ever had any direct or indirect experience with addiction, the only moment you're concerned about is, well, I have enough alcohol, where I have enough of this, where I have enough of that. You don't care about anything else. So I went to the monastery, and eventually I had to leave simply because I had to pay my bills. Because after 2 years and you're not paying your bills, the creditors get upset about it. So I then returned to UU ministry, and it wasn't really the first epiphany experience, that aha moment that I'd had. There was one that I'd had when I was 4 years old, living on the farm in Maine with pines, not like this, but pine trees and open areas. And I remember sitting on a stone wall. We have lots of stone walls in Maine. And just, I don't know, I was a little kid, 4 years old, just, just daydreaming. And all of a sudden, for one endless moment, I felt the universe flow through me. And it was like hum. It was like a vastness. I can't even begin to describe it. And I still remember that as clearly as the day that it happened. And I've had a number of those over the years. But those powerful moments that come to us, usually when we least expect it, transform us in a way, whether we're ready or not. And aha moments, or let's just say epiphany moments, are not that unusual. They actually happen more often than we think. And so that's what I want to talk about for a bit today. Now, every major religious tradition, I'm not sure about Unitarian Universalism, has practices and approaches to how to gain awareness and attention in what we call spiritual practice. If any of you get twitchy around the word spiritual, the way I tend to define it is relationship. Relationship to each other, relationship to this world, relationship to the future and to the past. But that's what, for me, spiritual practice is about. Buddhism talks about Satori or Kensho in the Zen tradition of striking to the heart of awareness. And if any of you have ever heard of koans, K-O-A-N-S, from Japan and China, there are ways to be able to strike to the heart and go beyond our logic and rationality. So in any event, Buddhism is very focused on how do we best pay attention every moment of our lives. Christian faith honors, sometimes, the women mystics of the Middle Ages who have very, very powerful spiritual practices and their writings. Islam has Sufi and other traditions, and I could go on and on. Of course, Aboriginal cultures, American Indians, for example, have many different practices around vision quests and how to go more deeply into awareness of levels of reality beyond this one. Here are some examples. Have any of you ever been to the Grand Canyon? Okay, I haven't, but everyone tells me that it is an extraordinary experience. It's like it's an aha moment when you go there and you see this incredible landscape, a sunset, holding a baby for the first time if you're the parent of the baby, being totally present and holding a person's hand as they die, sitting in deep meditation or prayer, as at a monastery, for example, but you don't have to go to a monastery, being able to just settle in and experience everything. And let's just take a moment. Do you feel the wind? Do you feel the noises and the sounds? If you really pay attention, maybe you can hear the evergreens and the wind blowing through those pine needles. Paying attention, stopping, being able to get off the treadmill that we call life. And as my old Zen teacher said time and time again, pay attention. She had a loud voice. And that was the focus of most of the religious traditions in the world. It's getting us out of the state that we tend to live in and reaching other states. So one truth of epiphanies or aha moments is that we all have them. But most of them we don't notice because we're too busy doing something else. And there's other means as well, which some of us may have experienced in past years. Bill Wilson, or Bill W., who is one of the co-founders of AA, and I'm part of the AA tradition, even though I disagree with the theology. Bill W., or Bill Wilson, along with Dr. Bob, were the two founders of AA in the 1930s. And what Bill Wilson had while he was trying to decompress from his addiction, he was in a hospital bed, and he had essentially a vision. A bright, pearly white light that appeared in front of him, and he said it was indescribable. And it didn't cure him from his addiction, but it did give him a way out of what he called insanity. So later, after AA was formed, in the 1950s, he remembered that vision, and so he went and worked with clinical trials on LSD, acid, because it was still legal at that time. Because what he wanted to do was recreate that extraordinary epiphany, that experience that had transformed him. And later, and he did have several experiences, later he tried to convince the people in AA that they also should take LSD as a means of therapy. And the people in AA at that time said, no, we're not doing that. They still don't want to do that. But it was one way that he thought people could go beyond our egos. Because there's one thing addiction does do to us is it loves our ego. Because we want something that is tangible, that will fill us, that will give us wholeness, essentially. And that's really our ego at work. Anyway, so another that I would recommend, you may know of it, Michael Pollan. Any of you know Michael Pollan? His latest 2 books, one is How to Change Your Mind. And what he has done for the last 10 years or so, well, I'll read the subtitle, How to Change Your Mind. What the new science of psychedelics teaches us about consciousness, dying, addiction, depression, and transcendence. And he has done clinical testing on psilocybin, on LSD, and a number of other substances that, if done well under clinical conditions, can open those doors to deeper awareness and going beyond ego and self. So there's a lot of research going on right now with psilocybin and other substances about how does psychedelic therapy help with depression, with addiction, post-traumatic stress disorder, and so on. And the provisional results so far around the world are that it can help enormously. It helps us break through that barrier that we call self and everything that we carry, especially like post-traumatic stress disorder. And in fact, I'm going to be undergoing testing on that in Eugene at the end of September. And I would be very interested to experience that. When I was in the 60s, I didn't try acid or anything other than cannabis because I was too screwed up. My mind was really messed up for a variety of reasons. And I knew that it would break me. So at 74, I'm going to try it with psilocybin under test conditions because I'm curious. I want to see what happens. And all of these ways are basically moving us out of self, out of our daily lives, and exploring something different, looking at the world in a different way. There's a wonderful little book that I used in at Glacier UU Fellowship in Kalispell and also in Meadville, where I was for 4 years, called Breakfast Epiphanies, Finding Wonder in the Everyday. And the person who wrote it, David Anderson, is a very liberal Lutheran minister back east. And what his approach is that every day we experience, we see, we hear, and so on with our senses, something that can take us out of our little box of comfort. But most of the time we don't pay attention to it because we're busy doing something else. I would highly recommend this book. It's very short chapters, very funny, very serious, and he's a wonderful writer. And we actually had a great time in the class that I taught about that. So all of these ways, and some of you go to the coast, some of you probably go on retreats and so on. Who was it went on a retreat? You did. Did you have any time to have silence?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
What?
and we were in a kind of, there were like clearings among trees, kind of like this, and so like moments when I could just look up and see the
Right.
rocks.
And what you're talking about a bit is something that my life partner, Deborah, who lives in Eugene also, has practiced. Have you ever heard of something called Shinrin-yoku? In Japanese, and it's called, the translation is literally forest bathing, or alternatively forest therapy. And the Japanese developed it. Have I done something terribly wrong here?
The tree just was responding.
Yeah.
Don't fall. Anyway, the Japanese in the 1980s, because people in Japan were very tense, they were working very hard, and they were dying very quickly, and there were a lot of alcoholism. So what they came up with was Shinrin-yoku is a way of going out into nature in groups and spending time reconnecting with the natural world. And so Deborah took a certification course. There's a worldwide organization that certifies people on this practice. And she's not doing it today. She did yesterday a Shinrin-yoku walk of taking people out into the forest and say 6 or 7 people. And what they are told to do is to go find a place to sit. Do not take this with you. Very important. The practice is to sit in one spot for an hour and take it all in. And if there are mosquitoes, you take them all in too. You listen, you see, you feel the wind, the sound of the trees, everything. And then what you're supposed to do is you ring a bell and everybody gets together and you have a picnic and talk about your experience. And it's a really powerful piece of work. So when I was in Meadville for 4 years, I was there during COVID. We had a wonderful time. And so I was invited to teach a class at Allegheny College, which is a small liberal arts college in Meadville, and highly regarded. And they asked me to teach a class on the theory of meditation and mindfulness and stress reduction. I'd never taught a college class before, but you know, why not? How hard can it be? So the students in the class were mostly seniors. There were 12 of them, if I remember correctly, mostly women, 2 men. And they were all seniors, and they had to do comprehensive exams and papers and projects that year. And they were tense. They were filled with stress because they were going to graduate. They needed to fulfill all these requirements. They didn't know where they were going to go to graduate school or go into business or whatever it might be. So what happened was they all got into the class and they were expecting that the book that we were going to use, that the college recommended, theory, was going to be what we were going to use. And I said, bullshit. We're not going to use it. If you want to read it, go ahead. But we're not focusing on theory. We are focusing on experience and being in the present moment and finding out what happens next. Because the present moment can be filled with surprises. So in any case, about 3 weeks in, no one was talking. They all expected me to talk, and I didn't really want to. So we met twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And on Tuesdays, we talk about practice, not really theory, but a little bit maybe. But I said, next Thursday, you're going to have fun whether you like it or not. And they all kind of looked at me like, okay. So the following Thursday, we meet in the room. And do you remember those little packets, the soap bubble packets? And you have a little wand inside of them. So I gave one to everybody and I said, okay, now what you need to do is spend the next 30 minutes blowing bubbles. And they did. It was an extraordinary transformation. They were laughing. They were almost like children again. The grimness that kind of filled them was just gone away on a temporary basis. And I said, so how do you feel? And several of them said, do you think we could do this in our other classes? I said, well, I'm not going to go there. You have to talk to your instructor. Later, Deborah came to visit me, and she did a Shinrin-yoku practice with them, going out into the woods, stopping, spending time really paying attention to nature. And I asked them to write papers about it, what their experiences were, and most of them said that it was one of the most extraordinary things they'd had in their lives because they never stopped. This gave them permission to stop, pay attention, and reconnect to the world. So there are any number of ways in which you or anyone could do those aha moments, those epiphanies, but just pay attention because they will come to you when you least expect them. And the last thing I'm going to say is when I was driving up here this morning, I thought I saw a lightning flash. And I thought, what the hell? Because I didn't hear anything in Eugene. And lightning and lightning and lightning. And I love thunderstorms. There was no rain. But when I got out, and I stopped to have breakfast, there was thunder and lightning. And, well, what a great moment that was. And I just stayed with it for a few minutes and then just enmeshed myself with the experience of nature at its best. So that's what I hope might help you all today and in the future. In the meantime, just enjoy this. And I believe I can still do a meditation. Can I do a short one?
Sure.
Okay. Now, please get comfortable. Whatever, I don't know if you or your mothers ever said, keep your back straight. That's part of it, by the way. Just pay attention to being in this forest, in this grove. Look up at the tree, look at the trunks of the trees. How does it feel to be in nature? And we'll just take a couple minutes and just breathe and take it in. How does it feel? Is it a relief? If you're trying to think, okay, I've got to get on to the next thing right now, just take some deep breaths and appreciate this world just as it is right here in this beautiful grove. And then I'll ring the bell.